I think we discussed this slide. I think that's where we left off.
No, you didn't do that one, Rabbi.
Okay, so then we'll start here because it's a very important slide. And it's not so, the details aren't so important because we're not doctors. Most of us are not doctors, and therefore we're not going to be prescribing medication. But this is a very important slide for Rabbanim to be aware of, because very often Rabbanim are the ones that get the complaints that the birth control, it's causing spotting, abnormal bleeding, and whether the women are complaining about acne or weight gain or cramps, etc. Very often, even if the purpose of the conversation is not to complain, but in the course of the conversation, let's say when a woman is describing the symptoms of her irregular bleeding and she's asking a nida shaila, so very often the shaila will come in and she's cramping. So is that a sign that the period is coming? Do we have to be choshesh that perhaps this is like a veses haguf, etc.? So it's important to know that a lot of these things are occurring because of we'll say the irregularity or the dosage of medication or of in this case it's not medication, in this case it's hormones, which is not the most appropriate for her body or for her situation. In other words, sometimes a side effect of higher progesterone or a side effect of the birth control would be acne, or a side effect would be breakthrough bleeding, in which case that could actually be addressed and hopefully rectified with a higher dosage of estrogen or perhaps a lower dosage of progesterone, etc. So it's important to know that although we're not going to be the ones who are going to give specific medications or suggest pills, this pill versus that pill, it's important for the Rabbanim to be aware and cognizant of the fact that different pills have different side effects, different levels and different dosages of estrogen or progesterone, higher or lower, yield different side effects and different problems, different issues. And perhaps some of just suggestions from the Rav, maybe speak to your doctor about this, speak to your doctor about that. Maybe you need a different pill, maybe you need a pill with higher estrogen. Sometimes those suggestions, especially if it's presented respectfully to the doctor, are well received, and when implemented correctly, could really make a difference in this couple's life. So this is just a cool slide. Again, I shared the slides already. I'll share it again. But this slide is just a good slide to know, to have in your back pocket, that when people are complaining with certain symptoms, so perhaps you can attribute the symptoms to their birth and they're on birth control. So we could better understand the symptoms based on the dosage of estrogen or progesterone, and perhaps the remedy would be to give them a higher, or to suggest a higher or a lower dosage of whatever specific hormone they are utilizing. Okay, so that really wraps up the discussion of the pill that we spoke about last week. Here in this slide, it is a shaila that comes up quite often, and this is the shaila of emergency contraception. We're just going to go from extremes. At least, the most common is the pill. Many women are utilizing the pill as a form of birth control, and most of the time it works. It really does work. It's very uncommon that the pill will not work. It doesn't have 100% efficacy, but it's very good. Of course, the pill or any form of birth control is only as good as the couple that takes it and their strict adherence to the method and to the to the protocol and whatever often they're supposed to be taking the pill. But if a woman is constantly missing her pill and she's not taking it for a number of days, so then of course that will have a negative impact. But assuming a woman is taking it for the most part when she's supposed to be taking it, give or take an hour or so, and she doesn't miss a day, it's pretty effective. Now there are cases where women get pregnant and they ask a shaila whether they're allowed to utilize the emergency contraception. So there's two basic approaches to emergency contraception in terms of the actual medical options, how you could treat it. One is a pill, right? The day after pill, Plan B, whatever it is. And the next one is putting in an IUD. It's interesting. Putting in an IUD is actually a form of emergency contraception. If the IUD is inserted immediately after the unprotected intercourse, so it will actually be effective. So if you look here, it says even up to 5 days. Even up to 5 days, you could put the Paragard in the copper IUD, and here the pill is up to 3 days. Okay, less effective on days 4 and 5, but you can still use it. Now, the shaila is, what is okay, there are medical options, how to prevent the pregnancy after the fact. What is the halachic approach to taking emergency contraception? Is that something which is permissible or not? So take a look at a most fascinating piece from Rav Zilberstein. Rav Zilberstein in his Sefer Shurei Torah L'Reifim. So Rav Zilberstein writes as follows: Ein litol trufa zu. We're talking about the emergency pill. Ve'afilu toch shivim v'shtayim sha'os. And even within 72 hours, again, over here, up to 3 days after unprotected intercourse, the Plan B will be effective. But says Rav Zilberstein, even within 72 hours, do not take it. Prat lemikra sha'ubar misakin es chayi ha'em. With the exception of a case where the pregnancy will present a sakana for the mother. And then he writes in Halacha Beis, Isha ha'omedes litol gululois postinor b'Shabbos. And if a woman is going to take the Plan B, the emergency pill, on Shabbos, yesh lechalel Shabbos, one is permitted to be machal Shabbos u'l'shachnei ala litol, and to convince her not to take it. Ela imkein ha'ubar misakin es chayeha v'noteles oso kedin. He writes here that it is permissible to be machal Shabbos in order to see to it that a woman does not take the emergency birth control, the Plan B pill. And it's an incredible psak. I can't see anyone's face because your cameras are off. But the first time I saw this, I mean, it was mind blowing, right? That he understands that there's two components that I wanted to address. Number one, that even within 72 hours, which according to most doctors, the way most doctors understand the way conception works, is that it doesn't happen immediately. A couple doesn't have relations and then immediately they are going to get pregnant, but it takes time for the zera to travel through the cervix, through the uterus, into the fallopian tube, to meet the egg, to penetrate and fertilize the egg. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight necessarily. And then once the fertilized egg is there, it certainly takes time for it to make its way down to the uterus and to implant into the uterus. So number one, the Rav Zilberstein writes that even within 72 hours, which is again is the window of time which we assume it does not implant itself into the uterus, but even within that time, that's considered ritzicha. That's considered murder. So much so that you could be machal Shabbos, because if it wasn't considered pikuach nefesh, then how could you be machal Shabbos? The only heter of chilul Shabbos is that of pikuach nefesh. So he understands that the creation of an embryo in a fallopian tube has the status of pikuach nefesh, which would justify chilul Shabbos. I think that is an amazing chiddush. Not everyone agrees to this. If you look in Sefer Nishmas Avram.
A second, Rabbi, excuse me, is he saying that it's pikuach nefesh for the unborn, not even in the uterus yet baby? Or is he saying it's pikuach nefesh that the woman who does it is going to be, we want to protect her from being over the isser? And there, is it protective for the woman or protective for the baby? And whose pikuach nefesh is it?
I would think that it's pikuach nefesh. The way I was understanding it was pikuach nefesh on the fetus. on the embryo. Because what would the pikuach nefesh of the woman be?
Well, she's performing a Chil Shabbos, which, sometimes we do things to prevent.
You can perform Chil Shabbos. You, Rabbi Hachbaum, see Sarah over here, and Sarah is about to take this pill. Isha omeres lito glulos postina b'Shabbos. Says Reb Zilberstein, you, Rabbi Hachbaum, yesh l'chawal Shabbos ulishachna, to be mishachnea ota.
Right, so I'm allowed to be mechal. Isn't there sometimes where you're permitted to be mechal Shabbos to save someone else? In other words, who is it? Am I allowed to be mechal Shabbos to tell her not to do it to save the baby? Is that what he's saying? Or to save her from committing this ritzicha, call it, to committing this act, which will put her in position, because how could you say that of lad that's not even embedded in the embryo, an embryo in the womb?
Either way you put it, meaning pikuach nefesh assumes there's a life which is at risk. So the shaila is, are you the one who is actively saving the life? Are you telling her not to engage in ritzicha to kill that life? But there has to be a life. So where's the life? The life I think he's referring to is the ubar.
So then it's not only are you doing this on Shabbos, but it's 2 steps removed. I'm not even directly the one saving the vlad. I'm talking to her and hoping to prevent her from doing something. But really, she would then, or not doing something. It's like, it seems to me maybe the svara is that you're saving her from this terrible, myself, what he's calling ritzicha. But it's with her, Michael Shabbos is to go to her. Is it a step removed from the baby?
Well, let's say a person was about to eat a cheeseburger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would we say that if Rabbi Hachbaum sees a woman who's about to eat a cheeseburger, so he's allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to see to it that she doesn't eat a cheeseburger?
L'chara not.
L'chara not. The only justification would be that of Pikuach Nefesh. The only time a Yid can be Mechal Shabbos is a Makom of Pikuach Nefesh. So Rabbi Weiner is writing here, Chalel alav Shabbos echad, achas kadesh yishmu Shabbos harbe. But again, isn't there? I mean, that's what the Gemara says in terms of the Gemara says it in terms of allowing the baby to be born. But the question is, meaning, so and Rabbi Brickman at that point there's no ubar. So then what's the pikuach nefesh? Meaning, does everyone agree that what he's saying is that there is a nefesh over here? There's a pikuach nefesh which is justifying Chil Shabbos.
I'm wondering if the nefesh that he's saving is the woman, because by being over on what he's calling ritzicha, what he's saying she's doing is so bad that she'd be chayav misa for that, as opposed to the cheeseburger case where it's an isra. You shouldn't eat it.
She wouldn't be chayav misa. She well, a din misa. But I think what he's saying to reference Rabbi Brickman's question is that I think we're saving the ubar, and he's saying that this is an ubar. An ubar is post tashmish, and once there's an ubar, even though it's very difficult to understand this from a medical perspective, that even within 72 hours the ubar exists, right? But nevertheless, since the tashmish was there, the zera was there, the egg is there, and the creation of the embryo, before 40 days, of course. We wouldn't say that, even though the Gemara says it's maya ba'alma, we wouldn't say lechatchila everyone can just have an abortion before 40 days. No, we don't say that. There's certainly a shift in attitude before 40 days, after 40 days in general in the sugi of abortion, which we'll get there with Hashem in future shiurim. But Lamaisa, the chiddush over here is that even before 40 days, even before implantation, there is an element of pikuach nefesh which would justify Chilul Shabbos. Sorry about that. Really good. That would justify Chilul Shabbos. Now, again, if you look down on the bottom, Sefer Nishmas Avram, so he writes, Nitan hayom limno harayon achar tashmish ayidei kadurim o hachnosas mitgan toch rachmi. So there's ways to prevent a pregnancy. Here he's referring to ones. So we're talking about a case where a woman is raped, and there are ways to prevent the pregnancy in rape cases, such as kadurim, like the emergency pill, or the insertion of an IUD. And it can be successful typically up until through 72 hours, but we saw even more. And he writes, it's reasonable to say that in the case of rape, יהיה מותר לנקוט באחד מהדרכים האלו, כי אין מדובר כאן על הפלה, אלא על השחזה זרע. Because here, within 72 hours, he says, we're not talking about an abortion. Right? We're not talking about a case where a woman presents a few weeks into the pregnancy or a few months into the pregnancy, and she cries, she breaks down, and she says that she was raped, and the child inside of her is a mamzer, etc., and she's seeking a heter for abortion. Here we're talking about something that happens immediately after. The shaila was presented immediately after the rape, immediately after the case. So within 72 hours, he writes, it's not even a shaila of abortion. It's a shaila of hashchasa zera. Which is, in other words, what it means is the prevention of implantation in the uterus. So that is so he seems to say clearly that before implantation occurs, the shaila of the embryo is not a shaila of pikuach nefesh. It's not a shaila of an abortion. It's not a shaila of a life. It's a shaila of hashchasa zera. Are you allowed to do anything which will proactively destroy zera? That's inappropriate. That's not allowed. That's hashchasa zera. Now, under certain circumstances, hashchasa zera will be mutter, such as a case of a rape, a very intense case. The hiskimiti hagoyin Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal, umayri hagoyin Reb Neubert. So this is what Nishmas Avram paskins. But you see from the discussion about rape that up until implantation in the uterus, we do not assume that the status of the embryo is that of a life, in which case, as he writes clearly, hapala, which is an abortion or an abortion, is not the shaila, and therefore the justification to break Shabbos would l'chayra not exist. However, according to Reb Zilberstein Abtab, who brings out this point, he uses in showcases the point by bringing out the nafkamina of Hilchos Shabbos. I think the only way to understand that is that of pikuach nefesh, by assuming that the vlad has a status of a life even before it takes root, before it implants in the uterus. So unless I'm reading the Reb Zilberstein incorrectly, it sounds like a tremendous chiddush from a medical perspective, and therefore it seems like a very tremendous chiddush from a halachic perspective. But I do think this is what he writes, and nevertheless, it is not necessarily the accepted approach. I think the more accepted approach is that which is recorded in Nishmas Avram, that within 72 hours or before implantation, it would not have a status of hapala. Although I can just tell you from halacha l'maisa, I've spoken to Reb David Cohen about this, and he very often does not like to answer questions about the emergency pill. On a few occasions, he's asked me to call Rabbi Bleich. I asked him about taking the Plan B pill, and he says, I'm not sure how it works. I don't want to get involved. Call Rabbi Bleich. And I've called Rabbi Bleich, and he's often not mako. But there are cases that come up where the emergency pill is important, and one should know about it in cases of extreme need, such as rape. I once was by Reb David Cohen's house, Rachmana Litzlan. He got a phone call of a woman who was raped by her father, and she was calling to ask a shaila of an abortion. So there, in that case, the woman was raped by her father, and it was a crazy case. There, I don't even think it was. I think it was after the 72 hours. But there, whatever, we're going to talk about abortion in the future, Mitzvah Shem. But there are cases where the Rabbanim are matir, but it doesn't seem like the emergency pill would be an option in many cases, according to Reb Zilberstein. Okay, any questions? Moving right along. Okay, let's talk about some other very common forms of birth control. Hormonal vaginal contraceptive ring, a lot of people call it the NuvaRing. So there is it looks like a little ring, which is inserted into the, hold on just a second. No, so Rabbi Brickman, your name is Pua, which I'm very flattered. I think that's you. But according to Reb Zilberstein, he writes will we be able to be Machal Shabbos to save an embryo, such as when the power in the lab fails? I don't think so. And I think the difference is as follows. That there's a difference between the creation of an embryo and the creation in a lab and the creation of an embryo inside. That, meaning we assume that we've always assumed that life begins when we implant the egg and the sperm into the uterus. That's when life begins, right? Rav Moshe writes even before 40 days, there's no heter to abort. Rav Moshe writes even before 40 days, it's a shaila of an abortion, and it's a shaila for tzitcha. So when does the clock start? So l'chara the clock starts. The clock starts when the vlad is implanted in the uterus. Now the chiddush over here, maybe this is what Rabbi Zilberstein is saying, is that we don't know exactly when the vlad is implanted in the uterus. Maybe for whatever reason, the egg was mamish on the very, very, very tip of the fallopian tube, and the sperm swam very, very quickly to the point where almost instantaneously the sperm and the egg met and fertilized, and then it dropped into the uterus. Mamish toch kedei dibor. So obviously, toch kedei dibor doesn't literally mean that, but very, very, very quick, shortly after the tashmish took place, that the embryo was created and then took root in the uterus. So who's to say that you could just take the emergency pill, right? Who's to say you could take the emergency pill? So perhaps out of maybe, and he's using the concept that we learned in the Gemara of Yuma, that sugit pikuach nefesh, that even safek pikuach nefesh is docha Shabbos. So even if it's safek pikuach nefesh, which is docha Shabbos, like Tosfos says in Yuma Pei Dalid, Pei Dalid. So in that sugi over there of pikuach nefesh, so maybe if it's even safek pikuach nefesh, which is docha Shabbos. Whereas the embryo in the lab, that's not a shayla pikuach nefesh. That's not a life. We don't assume that the creation of the union of sperm and egg creates life. That's what the Christian church believes. But we believe it has to be at least inside of the body, inside the body. So once it's inside the body, it could be in the uterus already. That's the life. So I do not think that Reb Zilberstein would allow for a person to be Machal Shabbos and a deraisa to get in his car when the power goes off and all of the genetic material is compromised or potentially compromised. He would not permit that, because that's not life. That's just mammon. That would be a tremendous waste of money and a loss. So maybe we could permit a guy to do that, to go in the car and to drive us, but not ayidei deraisa for a yid. Kach nira l'niyas daiti. Okay. Now, another very common form of birth control, not the pill, but what's called the NuvaRing ring, some type of vaginal ring. So what happens is, you place this ring inside the vagina, it goes right up top to the cervix. You wear the ring for 3 weeks, you take it out for the week, and then you have your period, you put in a new ring. Now, the ring contains the same hormones that the pill has. It has progesterone and it has estrogen. So you're getting the same amount of hormone. You're getting the same hormones that you are if you were to take the pill, but instead of swallowing a pill, you're putting the localized ring into osamakum right by the cervix, and that will give off the hormones. So why would some people prefer the NuvaRing ring over the pill? So there's a few reasons why a couple or a woman would prefer. Number one, she puts in the ring once and it's in her for 3 weeks. So she doesn't have to worry about taking a pill every single day at the same time. She puts it in, she's able to forget about it. That's number one. Another reason why women may prefer to use the ring over the pill is because when you take the pill, it's something it's going through your whole body. And there's the hormones are kind of like being mispashit and expanding and kind of taking a tour of the entire body, as opposed to the localized ring, which is giving off hormones in that specific area. And therefore, some people feel that is better for their body. Sometimes when women are spotting irregularly on the pill, and they still want to take the same concept of the estrogen and the progesterone. That's the form of birth control that they want to use. So sometimes they'll shift from the pill to the NuvaRing ring because they understand it to be a little bit of a less intense production or spread of hormones, and that's why sometimes people would prefer the NuvaRing ring. Now, what are the halachic shailas or the halachic considerations that are necessary when we have the NuvaRing ring? So number one, if you have a NuvaRing ring over here, which is blocking the cervix, which is in the zone of your bedika, so then it does raise a question of whether or not the bedika is valid if there was blocking, there's something blocking there. The Sidrei Tahara in Hilchos Nida, I believe in Kuf Tzadik Vav, talks about a case where a woman had wax inside, and other Achronim discuss different chatzitzas in the body vis-a-vis bedikas, not chatzitzas in tefillah. That's also a question we'll talk about in a second. But what about for the bedikas? So therefore, there are some poskim that do hold that if a woman has a nuva ring inside, l'chatchila she should remove the nuva ring for some of the bedikos. So on a practical level, she should remove it for the hefsek tara. She should take it out, do the hefsek tara, and put it right back in, or do the moich, or keep it in for the moich. That's probably okay.
Rabbi Siegelman.
Yeah.
Why would she put it in? How long does it take to work? Does she need it in when she's in Nida?
Very often she takes it out, then she'll get her period, but then she'll put her new one in during Shiva Nikiyim. So she'll have, or like, because it's usually you put it in a few days after you take it out, right? You take it out for a week. So she takes it out, and remember, so let's say it takes a few days for her to actually get her period. But by the time she has to put it back, it's usually really when she's bleeding or after she's finished bleeding, she's putting a new one in. So right around the time where she's doing bedikas, she is putting in her new ring.
Okay, I mean,
Think of it like an active pill, where they take the active pill, they get off of the active pill, then they go on their placebo. So the placebo week is really the week where they're bleeding, and then by the time they're starting their active pill is kind of when they're going back to the, Shiva Nikiyim and going back to the mikvah.
But I guess if she could wait a few hours or just that night after the fifth day, then that would be more ideal, at least to get a couple of bedikas.
Correct. But then there's a machlokes how many bedikas need to be done without the ring in. So some poskim say it should be done without the hefsek should be done without the ring in. Day 1 and day 7. I think Rabbi Welcher once told me that l'chatchila he wants them to take it out for at least day 1, and if they can do day 7. Some people are less machmer on day 7, as long as they have a hefsek tara and 1 bedika. A hefsek tara and 1 bedika is enough. Let's say on day 1 is enough for them to do the rest of their bedikas throughout Shiva Nikiyim with the ring in. So on the lechatchila level, though, hefsek 1 and 7 would be ideal. Less than that would be a little less than ideal, but still acceptable. But they really should take it out for the hefsek tara and at least one of the bedikas. And then after they're finished with their bedikas, how come this here? Then they have to worry about a chatzitza for the mikvah. There's a shaila whether the nuva ring presents a chatzitza shaila. So that already, I think we discussed this with Rabbi Weitzman in previous classes. That may depend on whether it's considered balua, whether it's considered beis hastorim. So again, the lechatchila approach is to take out the nuva ring for the mikvah. Now, we don't want it to be out for so long because we don't want it to have an adverse effect. We don't want it to cause spotting. Like if a woman disrupts her cycle or her birth control cycle. So, but if she goes to the mikvah, she prepares, she bathes, etc. She gets ready for the mikvah. And just before she goes in and dunks, she takes out the nuva ring, she dunks, and she comes out. And as she's putting on her underwear, she's getting dressed from the mikvah, she puts her nuva ring right back inside. So it's really only out for a matter of minutes. So that should not present a shaila. That should not present any issue in terms of abnormal bleeding as a disruption from the birth control, and it really is l'chatchila what she should do. B'diavad, if a woman was tovelas, a woman went to the mikvah and she forgot to remove her nuva ring, so we pass in b'diavad it is not a chatzitza. She does not have to go back to the mikvah, and b'diavad is not a chatzitza, but on the l'chatchila level, she should remove the nuva ring. The last consideration when it comes to the nuva ring, all this. Whether taking it in, putting it in, taking it out, it is theoretically possible and sometimes common for a woman to find blood on the ring. So what would be the status of blood found on the nuva ring? So really that's a serious shaila because it's certainly going into the vaginal canal like any other bedika, and therefore we should be choshish that there was a hargasha, right? Just like anytime we do an internal bedika, anytime we do a bedika, we're choshish that a hargasha took place, in which case it's a shaila d'oraisa. Once it's a shaila d'oraisa, the shear of dam that would present an issue on the nuvaring is afilu tipas dam kechardo, but even pachos, right? So blood on the nuvaring can present a serious shaila. So two eitzes. Eitzah number one is not to look. There's no chiyuv to take out the nuvaring and examine it. So some people take out the nuvaring and they immediately put it under water. They immediately wipe it off with a tissue before looking at it. That's one way to avoid the issue. A second, let's say you taka fine blood. So many rabbanim would recommend going to a bodekas at that point to try to locate a makkah. Almost always the bleeding is from cervical trauma, from you sticking your finger in and trying to grab the nuvaring, and very often it does create a makkah, a petza, and that's where the blood is coming from. But as we've spoken in the past, when we're dealing with a shaila and a deraisa, and it's a makkah, which it's reasonable that the dam is there, but it's not a vadai motzi dam. You don't know if it's vadai 100% that the blood is coming from there. So therefore, we would recommend going to a bodekas just to give us full, the eyes are there to give us full validation that it is completely coming from the makkah, and then we could write off the dam. But it is inconvenient, so I don't think there is any chiyuv to look at the nuvaring. So washing it off, wiping it off before looking at it is a good eitzah. Okay, that is the nuvaring. Some people think that the nuvaring doesn't cause spotting. It does cause spotting. It could cause a lot of spotting and a lot of frustration. But for some women, it is better than the pill, so they'll choose the nuvaring over the pill. Okay, what do we have over here on the top left? Anybody know what this is? It's potentially a chatzitza, right? This is a patch. This is a birth control patch that they put on different parts of the body. The shaila is the patch a chatzitza? We generally assume that it could seriously be a chatzitza, and therefore we encourage the women to remove the patch similar to the nuvaring. They should be removing the patch before tevilah and putting on a patch afterwards. It's usually okay. It's usually not a problem. In some cases, it's very difficult to remove, in which case it's a machlokes haposkim. But I think in all of these cases, we definitely recommend that they try to remove the chatzitza, to remove the patch before tevilah, and usually it is not a problem in terms of the schedule and the calendar, in terms of putting it on and taking it off and everything with mikvah. Again, it's just a matter of minutes, so it shouldn't present an issue. Some people may have heard of this, the Depo-Provera shot. It is a shot that goes into the bloodstream, and it is a more of a long-term birth control option. There is a tremendous amount of staining on it, so therefore we generally stay away from the Depo shot. And also, there are doctors that can't explain why, but they have seen that it stays in your system more than any other form of birth control, and they have seen an impact on fertility and a delayed return of fertility. So at this point, I want to just mention the myth. Many doctors have maintained that it is a myth that if you go on the birth control pill, so then it's going to affect fertility. Most doctors assume that is not the case. Most doctors assume that after you get off of the pill and you get your regular period back, so your fertility will resume and it will come back as it was without any issue. There are certainly individuals who claim the opposite, claim that their fertility was fine. They went on birth control, and after they went on birth control, they had a difficult time conceiving after the fact. It is possible, but doctors are unable to understand or explain scientifically why that should be. Whereas by the Depo-Provera shot, the hormones that were injected into the bloodstream, they have shown a high correlation of a delayed return of fertility with the shot, and therefore it really is not recommended. So halachically, we stay away from recommending this injection for staining reasons, for fertility reasons. It's not kedai. Try to think of another option of birth control. Rabbi Weitzman always says, if you could find if a person is able to come up with a birth control option, right, that is not hormonal, it is not going to interfere with your periods, and is not going to interfere with fertility, and it also won't present the shaila of shikha zera. So if you put that on the market, you'll probably be you'll be a big tzaddik because you'll be helping many couples. And he says you'll probably make $1 or $2 because you'll be everyone will be flocking to such an option. But unfortunately, it doesn't exist. We don't have on the market something which is really effective, non-hormonal, and doesn't present the shaila of shikha zera. Not yet. We have to keep thinking. But the Deborah Rivera people thought that this would be the option, but it's very hormonal and it's very difficult for staining and return fertility. Okay, now let's talk about an extremely common form of birth control, and that is the IUD. So there's two types of IUDs. There's an IUD called the Mirena, the brand name called Mirena. The Mirena is the hormonal IUD. And the way the hormonal IUD, it's a very, very small, this little small piece that is inserted into the uterus. It stays in the uterus. It kind of hooks onto the uterine wall. Okay. What it does is it inhibits the sperm from reaching the fertilized egg. Okay. Fertilizing the egg rather. The hormonal IUD will have an impact on the uterine lining, and the tail, the little strings that are on the bottom of the IUD thicken the cervical mucus and prevent it, making it even more difficult for the sperm to reach the uterus. So the Mirena is again the hormonal IUD, which is inserted. It does give out a certain form of progesterone, and it prevents pregnancy in the lady. Now, hold on. Just 1 second. Oh. Yeah, there is something called the IUB here, which is they have it in Israel, and you'll see how. Can you hear my screen? Can you hear the music, by the way?
Yes.
You can hear it?
Yes.
Okay, so here are the current intrauterine devices. Now we're going, in this video, so I'm going to show you why some people are not such a fan of the IUD, or some of the side effects or the issues with the IUD, the complications. This is how the IUD is inserted. The IUD, first they have this little tube that goes into the uterus. It opens the uterus a little bit, right? It was the potential shiloh of Sichas HaKever. And then the IUD is inside and it's shot up into the uterus. Now it's supposed to go to the top of the uterus and stay here and open, the wings open, and implant and position itself properly. Okay, this is a case of perforation where it went too high. So the first complication could be perforation, where it's inserted too high and it creates a hole or perforation on the top of the uterus. If you have ever heard of sometimes the body rejecting the IUD, so expulsion, sometimes the woman's body understands this foreign object to be something which they're not comfortable with. We're gonna talk about Psichas HaKever, and they're not comfortable with, so the body will reject it. Malposition. So because of those concerns, right, there's 3 concerns. Number 1 was perforation. Number 2 was expulsion. And number 3 was, what was the third one? The positioning. Malpositioning. Now, those are actually 2 different types of concerns. One is a medical concern that it could injure the woman and injure the uterus. And also, it's that it will impact efficacy, that it will not be effective if the IUD is positioned correctly. So very often, if a woman after her IUD was inserted, she's feeling off. She's feeling that things are not feeling correct. She's not feeling correct. She's not feeling good. She feels something is off, or there's a concern of irregular bleeding. So they'll do an ultrasound to make sure that the IUD is positioned carefully, because if it's not, it has to be taken out and put back, or else it won't do its job. Here in Israel, I believe in Israel, in Europe, they're working on a product called the IUB. So check this out. It hasn't hit the market in America yet, I don't think. So you have these balls that are that create this little circular, you know, I don't even know what to call it. But they claim that the IUB addresses all of the medical issues that you have in the with the other IUD, and circumvents all of those issues. Again, this I don't think this product is on the market, but what is on the market in America are two types of IUDs. You have the Mirena, which is the hormonal, and you have the non-hormonal. So how do each work? So we saw that the Mirena gives off hormones, right? And that affects the uterine lining. It affects the cervical opening. It prevents the sperm from fertilizing the egg. And the Paragard, which has no hormones, but the copper in it has some type of negative or adverse effect in the uterus. It doesn't allow for the sperm to actually fertilize the egg, and that's how it works. Contrary to what was believed, was that it works as a little abortion, that the sperm could definitely pass the IUD and fertilize the egg, but by the time the egg the embryo reaches the uterus, it wouldn't be able to implant, or even if it does implant, as it starts to grow, it would hit the IUD, and the IUD would basically end the pregnancy. That is not believed. That is not to be the case. We understand that it is more preventative than it is a reaction towards the pregnancy, or any way that it affects an ubar. If you look at the bottom, the reason why this type of birth control is so attractive is because the Mirena could be used for 5 years, and the Paragard could be used up until 12 years. So if you're dealing with a couple that have reached the end of their fertility, they're ending their childbearing years, but they still have a little bit more time, but they're not interested in the family and more children. So the IUD is typically the number one option, because you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to take a pill every day. And also, and you don't have to worry about it for years. You don't have to worry about it for years, up until 12 years. So some people really, really like that. Unfortunately, we do have cases of spotting because of the IUD, and therefore it can be very frustrating. It's often very frustrating the first couple of months, because as the body gets used to the IUD, so they really do have, women will commonly bleed, but after the first few months, it should regulate, and a woman should be very used to the Mirena, even used to the Paragard, and it shouldn't be too big of an issue. If a woman consistently bleeds and she's not stopping, and it's getting heavier and heavier, so then she should definitely talk to her doctor. Perhaps she should switch from a Mirena to a Paragard to Mirena, or sometimes this type of birth control is not appropriate for this specific woman. Another two halachic shilas that we have to discuss when it comes to the IUD. Number one is the insertion. Does it present the shayla psichas kever? So we generally assume that it does not. The tube here, look, the tube the tube that is used to place the IUD is 0.19 inches. So according to Rav Moshe, it is definitely not a shayla psichas hakever. It is definitely not a shayla psichas hakever. And when it's open, so then it's open. But once it's in the uterus, so then we generally assume that that's not a shayla psichas kever. The kever was open, but the kever wasn't open. So we generally assume that both the insertion and the removal of the IUD will not create nidos. That is the general approach. There are machmirim, but it should come out according to Rav Moshe that it would not present the problem of psichas hakever. Now, in terms of the bleeding while a woman has the IUD in, so we said if she has heavy bleeding, so then that's definitely a shayla of nidos. However, there is a psak from Rav David Cohen, which is a major chiddush, which is not accepted by many poskim. Rav David Cohen is machalik. He distinguishes between the Mirena and the Paragard. By the Paragard that has no hormones, Rav David Cohen actually paskins that even the heavy bleeding that a woman may see with the Paragard IUD, you can be makel because you can assume it's dam maga, that the blood is coming from the traumatic hitting of the walls of the side of the IUD into the walls of the uterus, which is creating the blood. But that blood is like taking a knife and stabbing at the walls of the uterus, which he assumes is a dam maga case, as opposed to the Mirena, where he says he's not familiar. He doesn't paskin on the Mirena lakula. He says because he's not familiar exactly with how the hormones work, but the way he understands the Paragard, so you won't be maker with the Mirena, but the way he understands Paragard is that there's no reason for a woman to bleed other than traumatic bleeding, which he assumes is dam maka. I had a few rabbanim. He said this publicly for a Pua Zoom call that we had a few years ago, and a few rabbanim emailed me. They were very, very against what he said. So I said, listen, Rav David Cohen is a chashav paisik. He's willing to hear you out. He's not afraid of his own shadow, to say the least. So let's write him a tshuva. So I actually had one of the rabbanim who was on the call. He wrote a tshuva to Rav David, and he sent it to Rav David. And Rav David, he wrote back. He said, I don't hear what you're saying at all. He said, when he called me, he said, what does this person think? He thinks that I'm making medical decisions myself. I spoke to this doctor, I spoke to that doctor. I was in touch with many doctors, and they all said the same thing. He said the metzias that was explained to him by professionals was that the bleeding is from the traumatic wound that is created by the IUD, and it is not any way dam nida at all. There is a study in Eretz Yisrael that's being done right now, which is taking ultrasound and images, hysteroscopies, imaging from the uterus, and comparing the uterus during the Mirena month and the month of the way the uterus looks with the Paragard. And the study shows that there really is a difference between the two uteruses, that they look very different. You can see that with the Mirena IUD that there's some type of hormonal change on the wall of the uterus, which is causing the bleeding. And whereas you don't have that same uterine response with the Paragard, but you do have bleeding because of the hitting of the IUD to the wall. So therefore, again, not every posik agrees to this, and not even every Pua Rav agrees to this. I don't think that the general approach in Pua is to be makel, but Rav David is certainly a chashav, a posik, and Rabbanim can certainly refer to Rav David as a shasat chak. If a woman calls and has the shaila, you don't want to take it on your shoulders. You want to call Rav David. Kedai Rav David lismo cholav b'shasat chak. It may not be an appropriate psak, but he's certainly very confident about this psak. Now, our doctors trusted that it is a makkah. So, doctors are trusted to be mavar metzias. Doctors are certainly trusted. By the way, the doctors that he spoke to are 3 from doctors. He spoke to 3 from OBGYNs, and he told me their names. One of them recently passed away, I think. But he's confident. is confident in this psak, but it's a huge chiddush, and not everyone agrees to the
And
psak.
Rabbi Salin, what is the standard psak, if there is, of how do other Rabbanim view it?
Generally, other rabbanim will say that if the bleeding is a significant bleeding, if it looks like a flow, so then you should be machmir and assume that it's needless, even if it's a paragard, even if it's a non-hormonal IUD.
It seems speaking to most people go with the Mirena. I'm just wondering why, if the Paragard is not hormonal, wouldn't that be something that's more appealing and it lasts longer? What would be reasons? It just seems from people spoken to that Mirena is much more common. The doctors seem to
I
push it a
think
little bit more.
the doctors prefer the Mirena. I think they find it's like a stable. It regulates you. The steady hormones. By the way, hormones could be like, some people are very scared of hormones, but other people, like, hormones are very healthy. Sometimes women, take hormones, they take birth control to regulate themselves. If there's some type of issue, some type of endocrinological issue, so they'll take birth control, not for preventing pregnancy, but just to stabilize and regulate the body. So sometimes that is a healthy thing. So I think the doctors they like it. It's more of a steady, basic understanding. They know they're more familiar with the IUD. I think there's a lot of confusion when it comes to the Paragard. I think doctors themselves will tell you they're not 100% sure how it works and what it's doing. So in general, they're more comfortable with the Paragard. Also, sometimes they're pushing the Paragard because of the effect that it has on your period. That what's common, and this is also an interesting shaila, what's common is that over the months, right, and eventually as you have it in for a year plus, so the period will dwindle, the period will get smaller and smaller to the point where it doesn't even exist on the Mirena. So your period will come in heavy, and then over the months it'll get lighter and lighter and lighter until the time of the month will come, but you won't even get a period. Or as some people have presented, they'll get a small little drop, a few drops of blood. At the time that the period comes, it's certainly not a flow, but it's definitely not nothing. So it's a drop or two. So we would typically say that drop or two is a status of a kesem. It's like a kesem. The shaila is, does the regularity, the consistency, and the date of the commencement of that blood, will that pose an issue in terms of a nida? It's the time of the month. It's not the quantity that I would typically expect, but it's the time of the month. So does that monthly drop, the tipachot sheet, would that present the shaila of nida? So that's a big machlokes haposkim. Rav Willig from YU told me, I asked him the shaila, he said, nida da'oraisa. He said, nida da'oraisa, even though it's only a tipas dam kechardo. And it doesn't come with a hargasha. But Rav Willig's psak is that since it comes at the time when you're expecting the period, and we know that this is in lieu of a period, so therefore that is a din of a hargasha, 100%. For Rabbi Brickman and any other Lubavitchers that are on this call, which I don't think we have too many, I was sitting by Rav Farkash in his house and in Eretz Yisrael, and I asked Rav Farkash this question. I asked Rav Farkash, for those who don't know, he's a major posek in the Chabad community, a major posek. So and that brief introduction of who Rav Farkash does not do justice. He's a moiridik Talmid Chacham, and he does tremendous work for Klal Yisrael. So I was once sitting in Rav Farkash's house in Eretz Yisrael, and I asked him this shaila, and he said, "Who wrote the Shulchan Aruch?" So I wasn't sure like what he wanted. Did he want me to respond? Usually when people ask those questions, they don't actually want you to answer, right? Because you just know that they're about to tell you something. So I didn't know how to respond. Should I tell him? Rabbi Yosef Kara, he didn't know. So he said, a man or a woman? So I said, a man wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He says, that's right. He said, women didn't write the Shulchan Aruch. He said, if a woman wrote the Shulchan Aruch, then it would say, if maybe you feel that maybe the period is coming, or maybe I think maybe this could be a period, maybe, I don't know. He said that's what it would be like if a woman wrote the Shulchan Aruch. But a man wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and the man wrote a Shulchan Aruch, he said there has to be a hargasha. And there was no hargasha. And we're talking about a dam that's minimal. And a woman doesn't feel it when she came out. So he said, stop reading the Shulchan Aruch like it was written by a woman, and start reading the Shulchan Aruch like it was written by a man. That's what he told me. So he said, halacha, that we are not choshesh for such a thing. Halacha, we're not choshesh for a tipachot sheet, if it's very minimal, doesn't come with a hargasha, it looks and smells and feels like a kesem, then it is a kesem, not a re'iyah meruba, not a re'iyah that would have a status of a deraisa. So anyway, it's a big machlokes haposkim, and generally we're meko. Generally we're meko. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure of Willig wrote his shita in the back of Rav Sobolovsky's sefer, the one that was put out by YU.
Yeah.
They have notes from Rav Shechter in the back and Rav Willig and and Rav Neuberger. So Rav Willig wrote his shita in the back of the sefer there.
It was originally printed in Beis Yitzchak.
It was already, I'm sure.
It was originally printed in Beis Yitzchak. It was put out later in Rabbi Sobolovsky's sefer, but originally his pieces on his chiddush on understanding Argasha is originally printed in Beis Yitzchak many years ago.
Rav Ben Chaim in our kehila, he agrees with Rav Willig. He tells the woman to be machmir.
Yeah. So generally speaking, so I'll tell you what I personally do. What I personally do is it really depends. Sometimes, and this could happen on the IUD, this could happen on the pill. So it really depends. If this is the woman's derech every month without exception, so then I personally am more no to lahachmir. But sometimes it's on and off. Sometimes they'll have a little tipachot sheet for a few months and then they'll have a flow. Once a woman has a flow and it's common, or at least somewhat common for her to experience a flow, then the tipachot sheet is definitely a din of a kesem. If the only time that I'm machmir is if a woman mamish has the tipachot sheet every month consistently without a flow. So then it's really hard to say that that's not her period. You know, I mean, Rav Farkash disagrees, but I hear where Rav Willig is coming from, especially the way he has a whole lamdasha approach to redefine hargasha. That's his understanding. But other poskim, can hear what Rav Willig is saying, especially if it happens on a monthly basis. Once there's a period, even if it's just every couple of months, so then it makes me feel a little bit better, to be mako, because it really is not like her flow. It's only like a kesem. All right, we'll stop here. It's 10 o'clock now. We'll stop here. I think we'll do one more. Oh boy, we'll do one more share. Hopefully, coming. We'll talk about birth control. One more share. We'll finish up a few halachic approaches to a few other types of birth control. We'll talk about the diaphragm and condom, the blockade methods next time, B'ezras Hashem, and some halachic literature around that. All right, wishing everyone kol tov, hatzlacha rabba.
Kol tov. Thank you, Rabbi Siegelman.
Great to see everyone.
Thank you.